Cyflwn da, which is good afternoon in Welsh. Welcome to Chef Mel's kitchen again. The reason for that traditional Welsh greeting is because I am making Welsh cakes today. This is a request from John, who works in our learning support department at Wiltshire College, and he's Welsh, so I hope these meet his expectations. I'm going to go through the ingredients, really simple recipe. For those of you that have never had Welsh cakes before, they're a little bit like scones, but not as risen as scones, so a bit flatter, but similar in flavour. And unlike scones, instead of being baked in the oven, these Welsh cakes are cooked on the hob. They're cooked on a pan, so that's the difference between them really. So I'm going to go through the ingredients and then the method after. So these are all the ingredients you need. All of the ingredients in today's recipe are long shelf life items, except for the milk, but if you want you can use UHT milk or powdered milk brought up. You only need a splash of it anyway. So you'll need a splash of milk, possibly just to build, to bring it all together. You'll need 50 grams of butter. You need 50 grams of white fat. So I'm using Trex. Traditionally you would use lard, but if you use lard it isn't suitable for vegetarians, so I'm using 50 grams of Trex instead, which is a vegetable fat. You'll need 1 egg. You will need, it's 200 grams, yes, 200 grams of self-raising flour. If you can only get plain flour, use the same, use 200 grams, but just add a teaspoon of baking powder as well, that sort of makes it self-raising. You'll need 80 grams of caster sugar, as well as a little bit extra at the end, probably about an extra tablespoon as well at the end to sprinkle on top. You will need 40 grams of currants. Currants is what you traditionally use in this recipe. I couldn't get them in the shop, so instead I'm using this. It's a blueberry and fruit breakfast topper, which is a mixture of dried fruits. It's a mixture of dried blueberries, dried cranberries, and dried chopped apricots, I think. But just use currants if you can get them, or raisins or sultanas, that works as well. And yeah, and that's all the ingredients you need to build it up. So get your flour into a bowl, and you need 50 grams of the Trex and 50 grams of the butter. It should be cold, by the way, that's important. And then with your fingers, we're going to do something called the crumbing method. Basically, get your fingers in and at a height, so developing these into a fine crumb. So with the tips of your fingers, trying to transfer as little heat from your hands as possible, you're going to, with a bit, to put some air, put some lightness in. And as my students know, I always end up throwing it everywhere. Sprinkle from large height until until it resembles fine breadcrumbs, basically. Now just add your dried fruit and your sugar, and just mix that a little with your hands, just until everything's nicely combined. Now crack an egg in and start bringing that together with your hands to form a dough. If you find that the dough is a bit dry, you can add a splash of milk, but only if you need to. So once your dough is together, it turns out I didn't need any milk to bring this together, it's quite moist. You need to sprinkle the flour over the surface that you intend to put your dough onto. Get your dough out of the bowl. Not out of the way. A little bit of flour on top, and a little trick as well, always put a bit of flour on the rolling pin, and that stops it from sticking. So gently we're going to start rolling this out. It is quite a soft dough, and my students will know when you're rolling something out, because it needs to be rolled quite thin, we need to roll it out to about 1/2 centimetre, 5 millimetres, that's quite thin. When you roll things out, you push it a little bit, then you move it, then you do that a bit more, and then you roll that again, just making sure. And what that does is it stops it from completely, if I just completely rolled that out to that thickness and didn't move it, it would end up being completely stuck to the surface below it. And then when you try and cut out the shapes, it's stuck to the actual surface. So by moving it as you roll, and I can feel that it's a very soft dough. So keep doing that until you get to 1/2 centimetre thickness. Right, so once you've got it to the desired thickness, you'll need a 6.5cm cutter. I don't have a 6.5cm cutter, but I've got a glass with that same diameter, so I'm going to use that instead. With your cutter, or your glass, dip it in flour a little bit and that will help stop it from sticking, so put that in the flour. And then I'm going to cut out my Welsh cakes. You should, there we go, there's one. You should roughly get about 10 Welsh cakes out of this. Once you've cut all those shapes out, you can bring it together again and cut out a few more, but don't re-roll and keep re-rolling, because eventually the texture will be affected by reworking it. So I would say only rework it once to get a couple more out. So it turns out I managed to get 12 out of it actually. 1, 2, 3, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12. I got 12 out of it rather than 10, but these are ready now and I'm going to get a pan onto a high heat. Right, now traditionally when you make Welsh cakes it's normally made on a flat griddle pan, but I don't have one, so actually I'm just using a crepe pan here, a non-stick crepe pan. So I put it on a really high heat and I'm just going to put the teенsiest little bit of Trex on there, and all I'm going to do is, you can see it melting immediately, and you can see how sort of hot it is, I'm literally just going to sort of run that around the pan and actually mop up kind of the excess. It's just to help the cakes get started. This is the hardest bit of the recipe, so do this in batches. You roughly need, you need about 2 minutes each side. But this is where it can burn, so it's all about heat monitoring here, okay? So I'll do 3 at a time. First batch might come out a little funny, but we'll see. So 2 minutes each side, and then transfer them to a cooling rack or a plate. Right, this is a bit easier with a palette knife, but I don't have one, so I'm using a skillet. Whoa, there we go, lovely. So that should be the colour that you're aiming for. So, but it may be the case that the first couple you try are a bit on the darker side, a bit Darth Vader. Okay, so another couple of minutes on that side and then they can be transferred. Once you've done all of those Welsh cakes, transfer them to a cooling rack, or if you don't have a cooling rack, just a plate with some greaseproof paper. Put that aside. And whilst they're still warm, sprinkle them with caster sugar. So I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons, I would guess. Just make sure, sort of liberally sprinkled whilst they're still warm. So these Welsh cakes are ready to eat now, or you can put them in a sealed container and they'll last for 3 days. Wyn hao, or enjoy.